There are moments in life when something so small and simple happens that it changes everything. One night, on a cold, unforgiving evening, Jacob, a struggling taxi driver, was about to experience such a moment, though he had no idea how much. That one ride would alter the course of his life forever. If you've ever wondered how a single act of kindness, given without expectation, can ripple through time and change destinies, then stay with me. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share this incredible story with someone who needs to hear it. Because this isn't just a story about a taxi ride. It's about humanity, hope, and how compassion can break down walls we don't even see. Jacob was no stranger to hardship. Every day, he worked tirelessly behind the wheel of his battered, yellow cab, winding through the cold city streets, searching for fares that barely covered his expenses. The taxi was old, its paint chipped and faded, its engine wheezing like an old man struggling to climb a hill. But it was his lifeline, the thing that kept a roof over his family's head and food on their table. That night, the wind was cruel, blowing through the narrow streets with a sharpness that cut through every layer of clothing. The streetlights flickered unevenly, casting long shadows on the sidewalks, and the city itself seemed to be holding its breath under a blanket of frost. Most people were safely tucked inside their homes, warmed by the glow of their heaters and the comfort of their beds. But Jacob was out here, alone in the freezing night, trying to make his daily quota before he could call it quits. He wrapped his hands around the steering wheel, feeling the rough leather bite into his skin through the thin gloves. His breath formed little clouds that vanished into the chilly air inside the cab. The heater sputtered weakly, barely able to fight the cold that crept through every crack and seam of the vehicle. He glanced at the fuel gauge, dangerously close to empty, and at his watch, realizing he had only a couple of hours left on his shift. Jacob's mind was busy juggling numbers, the rent that was overdue, the electricity bill that had grown too high, the groceries he still hadn't bought. He wasn't proud of his life, but he was determined. Every day he promised himself things would get better, but every night it felt like the same endless cycle. Suddenly, as he slowed down to take a corner, something caught his eye, a figure standing alone on the sidewalk, barely visible in the dark. It was a woman, wrapped in a thin, threadbare coat, shivering violently. Her posture was fragile, her shoulders hunched against the biting cold. She looked exhausted, almost lost. Jacob felt a tug at his heart. He was tired, hungry, and frustrated, but here was someone who looked like they needed help. For a moment he debated driving past. After all, picking her up might not pay well. He didn't know where she wanted to go or if she could afford a ride, but something about the way she stood there, vulnerable and alone, stopped him. He pulled the taxi to the curb and rolled down his window. "Need a ride?" he asked, his voice rough from years of shouting over traffic and city noise. The woman looked up at him, her eyes meeting his for the first time. They were tired but held a quiet strength. She nodded, slipping into the back seat without another word. The cab door shut with a soft thud, and suddenly, the small space inside felt warmer. Jacob glanced in the rearview mirror. She was wrapped in that thin coat, but the shivers hadn't stopped. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, fingers white from the cold. He pulled the heater knob up, trying to push some warmth toward her. "So, where to?" Jacob asked, trying to break the silence. She hesitated before giving him an address. It was clear she didn't want to talk much. Jacob respected that, but decided to share a little about himself, hoping to ease the tension. "I'm Jacob," he said quietly. "Been driving a cab for years now. It's not easy, but it's honest work." He smiled faintly. "What about you?" She looked out the window, watching the city blur past. "Name's Claire," she said finally. "It's been a long day." Jacob nodded, sensing the weight behind those words. They drove on in silence for a few moments, the hum of the engine the only sound between them. Jacob's thoughts drifted to his family, his wife, his 2 kids, all waiting for him to come home. He thought about the bills piling up on the kitchen table and how he'd promised his son a birthday present last year that he still hadn't managed to buy. "I know how hard life can be," Jacob said softly. "Sometimes you just need someone to show a little kindness." Claire turned her head and gave him a small smile. "You're right." The warmth of that smile touched Jacob in a way few things had in a long time. Here was a stranger, someone from a world so different from his own, and yet, in that moment, they shared something real. As the taxi rolled through quiet streets, Claire began to open up, just a little. She spoke about her job, about the tough decisions she had to make. Every day as a judge, she didn't complain, but Jacob could hear the exhaustion in her voice, the invisible burden she carried. Jacob was surprised. He had never met a judge before, someone so close yet so distant from the world he knew. To him, she was just a woman, in need on a cold night. They talked about justice, about fairness, about the cracks in the system that left people like Jacob struggling while others lived comfortable lives. But most of all, they talked about humanity, how everyone, no matter their status, faced battles no one else could see. Jacob found himself sharing more than he intended. The fear of losing his taxi, the pressure to keep going for his family, the feeling that no matter how hard he worked, he was always just scraping by. Claire listened without judgment. She told him about her own struggles, how the weight of the law could be just as crushing as the cold night outside, how sometimes she wondered if the world could ever be truly fair. The taxi continued its journey. At one point, Jacob pulled over at a small corner shop and bought 2 hot drinks with the little money he had left. He handed one to Claire, who accepted it gratefully. It was a small act, but to both of them it felt like a lifeline. When they reached Claire's destination, she handed Jacob a note and a generous tip. Jacob looked at the note, curious but cautious. "Thank you," she said softly before stepping out into the night, disappearing into the darkness. Jacob sat back in his seat, staring at the note in his hand. It was a simple message. Kindness changes lives. That night, as Jacob drove away into the cold, he felt something shift inside him. He didn't know it yet, but this brief encounter would stay with him forever, and their lives would be forever intertwined. If you believe that kindness has the power to change everything, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, hit the like button, and share this story with your friends and family, because sometimes all it takes is one small act to start something truly incredible. Jacob couldn't shake the feeling that night. The small note in his hand burned with meaning. Kindness changes lives. Those words echoed in his mind like a whisper, promising something more, something hopeful. For years, Jacob had trudged through life like a shadow, barely noticed, barely surviving. But that simple act, offering a ride to a shivering woman, had opened a door he never thought existed. The next morning dawned cold and gray. Jacob woke, before the sun, as he always did, ready to face another day behind the wheel. But now, something was different. There was a lightness inside him, a new hope wrapped in the cold morning air. He rolled the note in his pocket, touched it often as if it were a charm, a talisman reminding him to keep going. His family was still asleep when he crept downstairs. The small apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the heater struggling to warm the rooms. His wife, Maria, was a pillar of strength through all their struggles. But Jacob saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the same exhaustion he felt. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat at the small kitchen table, staring out, the window at the city waking up, the streets where he would spend his day behind the wheel, ferrying strangers like the woman from the night before. But Jacob wasn't just driving a cab anymore. He was carrying something bigger, a reminder that kindness mattered. The hours passed slowly as he picked up fares. Many faces blurred past his windshield. Some were polite, some rude, some indifferent. But Jacob had a new perspective now. Each passenger was someone with a story, someone deserving of respect. During a break, he pulled out the note and read it again. Kindness changes lives. He thought about the woman who had shared a moment of her life with him. Claire. A judge, she had said. someone who decided the fates of others every day. Yet that night, she was just a shivering woman in need, just like any other human being. Jacob's thoughts lingered on Claire's words about justice and fairness. He knew the system wasn't kind to people like him. Working hard and still struggling wasn't justice. But maybe, just maybe, there was a way to change that. As the day wore on, Jacob found himself watching the city with new eyes. The frozen streets, the people rushing to their destinations, the homeless wrapped in blankets on the corners. They were all part of the same story, the story of struggle, resilience, and hope. One fare took him to a local community center where Jacob occasionally volunteered when he had the time. It wasn't much, but handing out food and warm drinks to those in need made him feel connected. He helped a few people that afternoon, feeling that same warmth he had felt during his ride with Claire. He knew his life wasn't perfect. The bills still loomed, the debts piled up, but for the first time in a long time, he felt a spark of purpose. That spark was growing. That evening, as Jacob drove home, the city lights twinkled against the dark sky. He thought about Claire again, how brave she must be to carry the weight she did, how lonely that burden must feel sometimes. Later that week, something unexpected happened. Jacob's taxi stopped at a red light near the courthouse downtown. Waiting beside him was a sleek black car. Out stepped Claire, dressed impeccably now, no longer a fragile woman in a thin coat, but a confident figure with authority etched in every movement. Their eyes met through the window. Jacob smiled and nodded. Claire returned the gesture, a quiet acknowledgement of the shared moment between two very different lives. He wanted to say more, to thank her for the kindness she had shown, but the light changed, and Claire drove away. That night, Jacob sat with his family, sharing the story of the ride, the unexpected passenger, the kindness, the hope. His kids listened wide-eyed, amazed that their dad could have such an encounter. Maria squeezed his hand, proud and hopeful. Days turned into weeks. Jacob found himself thinking about how to make a difference. He started small, offering free rides. To those who couldn't afford it, helping elderly passengers with their groceries, listening more carefully to people's stories. Word spread, and Jacob's taxi became more than a ride. It was a place where people felt seen and heard. One afternoon, a letter arrived addressed to Jacob. It was from Claire. She thanked him for his kindness and shared how much that night had meant to her. She wrote about her own challenges and how their brief connection had reminded her why she chose her path, to serve justice with compassion. Claire invited Jacob to a community event she was organizing, an initiative to support struggling families and individuals in the city. Jacob hesitated, but knew he had to go. This was a chance to step out of survival mode and into something bigger. At the event, Jacob met people from all walks of life, volunteers, social workers, local officials, and others who cared. Claire greeted him warmly and introduced him as a true example of kindness in action. Together, they spoke about hope, justice, and the power of human connection. That night, Jacob realized that the ride with Claire wasn't just a moment. It was a turning point. His life was no longer just about making ends meet. It was about making a difference. And in that difference, he found a new kind of wealth, a wealth of purpose, dignity, and connection. Jacob stood by the window of his small apartment, staring out at the city lights shimmering through the chilly night air. The events of the last few weeks had changed something deep inside him. That simple act of kindness, the ride he gave to Claire, the woman he now knew was a judge, had grown into a spark that was lighting a path forward in his life. He remembered every detail from that night. The cold, the rain, the way Claire had clutched her thin coat around her, and how she had quietly accepted his offer to help. It was remarkable how a single moment, a single choice, could ripple outward and reshape the course of one's life. Jacob's days had shifted. His taxi rides were no longer just a way to earn money and scrape by. They were an opportunity to connect, to understand people, and to be a force of kindness in a world that often felt harsh and indifferent. He found himself asking deeper questions about what it meant to live with dignity, to treat others with respect, and to carry hope even when the future seemed uncertain. One morning, as the sun began to rise over the city skyline, Jacob prepared for his day. His wife Maria was already bustling around the small kitchen, making breakfast for their children. The kids were still sleepy, but their faces brightened when they saw their father. "Dad!" his youngest daughter called, reaching up for a hug. Jacob smiled, feeling a surge of gratitude. Life was hard, but these moments, the laughter of his children, the quiet support of his wife, were what made it bearable. Before leaving, Jacob checked his pockets and pulled out the note Claire had given him. The words "kindness changes lives" were etched clearly on the small piece of paper. He smiled, tucking it safely into his wallet. It was more than a reminder, it was a call to action. As he climbed into his taxi and started the engine, Jacob thought about the community event Claire had invited him to attend. It had been an eye-opening experience. He had met people dedicated to helping those struggling to find their footing in the city. Social workers, volunteers, activists, they all believed that change was possible if enough people cared. Jacob felt out of place at first, unsure of his role among such organized efforts. But Claire had insisted he was an important part of the movement. His kindness, she said, was the foundation upon which real change could be built. During one event, Claire shared a story about her own childhood, how she had grown up in a modest home, how she had faced obstacles many times, but had always held on to her belief in justice. Listening to her, Jacob realized that despite their different worlds, they shared common hopes. Inspired, Jacob decided to do more. He began volunteering regularly at the community center, helping distribute food and warm clothes during the cold winter months. His taxi became a safe space for people who needed more than just a ride. It became a place where stories were shared and kindness was passed along. One afternoon, while waiting for a fare outside a busy market, Jacob noticed a young mother struggling with two small children and heavy bags. Their clothes were worn and threadbare, and the woman looked exhausted. Without hesitation, Jacob offered to help. He loaded the bags into the trunk of his taxi and invited the family inside to warm up. As they drove them home, the woman, whose name was Rosa, shared her story. She was new to the city, trying to escape an abusive relationship and build a better life for her children. Jacob listened carefully, offering words of encouragement and promising to connect her with resources he had learned about through the community center. Over the next few weeks, Jacob checked in on Rosa and her children regularly. He helped her find a job opportunity, assisted with childcare, and even arranged for legal advice through Claire's contacts. This work gave Jacob a profound sense of purpose. He was no longer just a taxi driver struggling to survive. He was a pillar of support in his community, a beacon of hope for those who had been forgotten. One evening, after a long day, Jacob returned home to find Claire waiting on his doorstep. She had come to talk, to offer thanks for his dedication. "Jacob," she said warmly, "you've shown me that true justice isn't just about courtrooms and laws. It's about people caring for one another, about small acts that add up to something powerful." Jacob nodded, feeling humbled. "I never thought a simple ride could lead to this," he admitted. Claire smiled. "Neither did I. But it's a reminder that we all have the power to change lives, no matter where we start." That night, as Jacob sat with his family, he felt the weight of possibility pressing down on him. His life was not defined by poverty or struggle anymore. It was defined by the choices he made and the kindness he shared. Jacob woke that morning to the quiet hum of the city outside his window. The memories of the last few months felt like a whirlwind, yet they had changed everything about his outlook on life. That one night, giving a ride to Claire, the shivering woman who had turned out to be a judge, was no longer just a moment in time. It was the beginning of a new chapter. As he prepared for his day, Jacob's thoughts drifted to the community center where he now spent many afternoons volunteering. It was a place where people found warmth and hope amid the coldness of their struggles. He remembered the faces of those who came through the doors, children with bright eyes despite hunger, elderly folks who had nowhere else to go, and young mothers like Rosa trying to hold their families together. Jacob's own family was a constant source of strength. Maria had been his rock through all the hardships, standing by him with unwavering support. Their children, innocent and full of dreams, reminded him every day why he had to keep pushing forward. The taxi stood outside, waiting for him to start another day of driving, of meeting strangers who carried their own stories of hardship. But Jacob wasn't just driving anymore. He was connecting, helping, and learning how one person's kindness could start a chain reaction. One afternoon, a young man named Amir got into Jacob's taxi. Amir looked exhausted, his clothes dirty, and his eyes carrying the weight of years spent on the streets. Jacob could tell immediately that Amir was more than just another passenger. He was someone in desperate need of help. As they drove through the city, Jacob listened quietly as Amir shared bits of his story. He had run away from an abusive home, had no stable place to live, and was trying to find work. Jacob's heart went out to him, remembering his own struggles and the moments when he had felt utterly alone. When they arrived at Amir's destination, a crowded shelter, Jacob gave him a warm smile. "If you need anything, you know where to find me," Jacob said softly. Over the next weeks, Jacob took it upon himself to check in on Amir. He introduced him to the people at the community center, helped him with resumes, and even lent him money for basic needs. Amir's progress was slow but steady, and seeing him smile again gave Jacob hope. Meanwhile, Jacob's relationship with Claire deepened. They met regularly at community events and through their shared mission of helping the city's vulnerable. Claire admired Jacob's humility and determination, qualities she felt were rare in her world. One day, Claire invited Jacob to speak at a local town hall meeting about the challenges faced by the poor in the city. Jacob was nervous but agreed, realizing this was an opportunity to give voice to those often overlooked. Standing before a room full of officials and citizens, Jacob told his story, not just his own, but those of the many people he had met. He spoke about the importance of kindness, the failures of the system, and the urgent need for compassion in leadership. His words touched many hearts. Afterwards, several community leaders approached him with offers to help, funding for programs, job training initiatives, and legal support. Jacob felt the weight of responsibility but also a surge of hope. For the first time, he saw a future where people like him and those he had helped could have a real chance. Back at home, Jacob shared the news with Maria and the children. Their faces lit up with pride. The family's struggles were far from over. But now they had a new purpose, a new mission to fight for justice and kindness. That night, as Jacob lay in bed, he reflected on how far he had come. From a man barely surviving to someone who was becoming a catalyst for change. Jacob had never imagined that his life would take such a turn. The same hands that once gripped the worn-out steering wheel of a battered taxi were now helping build bridges between the city's forgotten and those who held power. But the road was far from smooth, despite the growing attention from the community. And some local officials, Jacob faced challenges that tested his resolve daily. The city's bureaucracy was slow, often dismissive, and there were people who doubted that a poor taxi driver could make any real difference. Jacob remembered the day he received an official letter rejecting some of the funding proposals he had helped organize. It was a blow, a reminder that change was often resisted by those comfortable with the status quo. But Jacob refused to give up. He knew that real change required persistence, patience, and the willingness to keep pushing even when the path was uncertain. Claire was his anchor. She continued to offer support, both professional and personal. Their friendship deepened as they worked together, a unique bond between a judge and a man who had once only dreamed of a better life. One evening, after a long day at the community center, Claire joined Jacob for dinner at his modest home. Maria prepared a simple meal, and the children gathered around, their laughter filling the small space with warmth. As they talked, Claire shared insights from her work, cases where justice was elusive, where the voices of the poor went unheard. Jacob listened, feeling the weight of responsibility even more keenly. "Jacob," Claire said softly, "your story reminds me why I became a judge. To fight for those who have no power. To ensure that kindness and fairness can still triumph." Jacob smiled, humbled. "It's not just me, it's all of us who choose to care." Over the next months, Jacob's work at the community center expanded. He helped organize job fairs, legal aid clinics, and youth mentorship programs. He saw young people inspired to believe in themselves and build futures they once thought impossible. But the challenges continued. One cold night, Jacob's taxi was vandalized by unknown attackers, a warning from those threatened by his growing influence. The city's streets suddenly felt less safe, and the burden heavier. Maria worried for him, her eyes filled with tears. "Promise me you'll be careful," she pleaded. Jacob held her hand tightly. "I have to keep going, for our family and for everyone who needs a chance." Despite the threats, Jacob's resolve only strengthened. The community rallied around him, offering support and protection. Neighbors organized watch groups, and local businesses donated supplies. One day, Claire surprised Jacob with news that changed everything. The city council had approved funding for a new social program inspired by their efforts, a program aimed at providing shelter, education, and job training to the city's most vulnerable. Tears welled up in Jacob's eyes as he realized that their hard work was starting to pay off in real, tangible ways. As the new program launched, Jacob found himself at the heart of a movement that was growing stronger every day. He watched as people once forgotten were given hope, skills, and dignity. His family's future looked brighter, and his own dreams began to feel within reach. Jacob's journey had come full circle, but the story was far from over. The struggles, the small victories, and the bonds he had forged had all led to a moment of transformation. Not just for him, but for an entire community. The new social program, funded by the city council's approval and fueled by the passion of people like Jacob and Claire, was making a difference. It was more than just a shelter or a job training center. It was a beacon of hope for those who had felt invisible for so long. Jacob spent his days overseeing the program, visiting families, talking to the youth, and connecting with local businesses willing to offer apprenticeships. Each success story was a reminder that kindness and determination could break the chains of poverty. One afternoon, Jacob received a call that would change his life forever. Claire's voice was warm but urgent on the other end. "Jacob, the judge's bench has an opening. The senior judge is retiring, and I've put your name forward." Jacob was stunned. He had never imagined a life beyond the taxi, yet here was an opportunity born from years of courage, kindness, and perseverance. The process wasn't easy. There were skeptics, critics, and moments of self-doubt, but Jacob's character, his dedication to justice and the community, shone through. He passed the interviews and evaluations, his story inspiring many on the selection panel. When the day came for his official swearing in as a judge, Jacob stood tall, proud, and humbled. Maria and the children were there, tears streaming down their faces as they watched a man who had once struggled to feed his family now take on a role of great responsibility. Claire, too, stood beside him, her eyes shining with pride. Jacob's first day on the bench was a profound experience. He listened to cases involving people from all walks of life, always mindful of the struggles he once faced. His judgments were fair, tempered with empathy, and rooted in the belief that everyone deserved a chance. But Jacob never forgot where he came from. He continued to support the community center and worked tirelessly to ensure the social programs he helped create would thrive for years to come. One day, a young man came before him in court. Amir, the same young man he had met months ago in his taxi. Amir had been accused of a minor crime but was truly a victim of circumstance. Jacob recognized him immediately and used his position to ensure Amir received the help he needed rather than punishment. It was a powerful moment, a testament to how compassion and justice could coexist. As years passed, Jacob's story became a symbol of hope in the city. His life showed that no matter where you start, with kindness, courage, and the support of others, it's possible to change not only your destiny, but the fate of many. He often thought back to that cold night when he gave a ride to a shivering woman, never knowing she was a judge. That simple act of kindness had set in motion a chain of events that reshaped his life and the lives of countless others. If you've been inspired by Jacob's journey, please like this video, share it with those who need encouragement, and subscribe to the channel for more incredible stories that show the power of humanity. Remember, a single act of kindness can change a life forever, and sometimes that life is your own.